Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. While I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking back to everybody's memories of 2016 and even earlier when it came to Russia's cyber activities with regard to the Ukraine. And I thought about all the fears that we had going into the most recent invasion of Ukraine. And I thought things haven't gone the way we would have predicted even back then. So my next step from there was I said, well, then I have to start talking to experts. And so I thought of the experts I could find on this. And the people I thought of were Supervisory Special Agent Elvis Chan from the FBI, who has been working on various cyber fronts for a long time now in both secretive and not so secretive ways. And also Mike Sikorsky, who is CTO now at Unit 42, and did a long stretch before that at Mandiant, where I believe you were the malware guy, right?
Yeah.
And also worked on SolarWinds there, and I believe was one of the first people who found it. And before that, a long stretch at the NSA. Combined, they have perspectives on what has happened, is happening, and will happen in the Ukraine that I thought would be interesting. For the conversation today, I want it to be exactly that, a conversation amongst us. It's going to be a little more free-willing. It's not going to be slide-based. And hopefully that'll make it a little more organic and easier to listen to. And so it's going to be like that. It's going to be a conversation. We'll work our way through a timeline. And if we have time, we'll open it up to a few questions. We've got 50 minutes to talk now, so let's get started. Mike, known, I think, to most people as Sicko, is that right?
Yeah, that's what my friends call me.
Okay, Sicko. Well, then I'll call you Sicko.
I'm not crazy or anything.
No. It's just from your name. So, Sicko, let's trace this back to 2016 and what we're seeing and what Russia was doing. Can you set kind of the scene for us?
Yeah, so I think when you say Armageddon, you might be over-exaggerating, but I don't actually think that because of what I lived, right? So going back towards 2016, we've seen, and even before that with Black Energy, we've seen Russia using Ukraine as like the playground to test their stuff, right? But talking about 2016, that's when Indestroyer / Crash Override, as it was called as well, was launched against Ukraine, which was really the first really big attack in that space where we actually saw the lights go out in Kiev. And it was regarded as like a test of like their capability. And that's 2016, right? So when we talk about what's happening now, that's 5-6 years later, right? And then right after that, in 2017, we saw NotPetya. And if you're not familiar with NotPetya, it was a ransomware attack, sort of. There was WannaCry going around at that time, which leveraged Shadow Broker's leak, which was using Eternal Blue exploit, and it was really spreading widely with WannaCry, right? And it was, if you remember, that attack. And then there was this popular malware called Petya, and sort of someone, Russia, decided they were going to merge those two together and throw it at Ukraine. And it spread like wildfire throughout there. 400,000 systems impacted. Energy, power plants went down. It was really bad. But there was a lot of collateral damage off that attack. If you remember, NotPetya, lots of people got hit by it because it spread so fast. I think Maersk was like the big one, right? The biggest shipping company in the world. Got hit, and they were out of operations for like a day or two. And NotPetya was extremely destructive. Most ransomware, it encrypts your system, you can get your files back. NotPetya, it encrypts your system, but it also destroys your master boot record, and the system is completely unusable. So if you're hit by NotPetya, that's it. You're not getting your system back, it's game over. And that was what was thrown at Ukraine in 2017.
Let me take a second to take a step back here. You talked about the Russians kind of bolting together these multiple tools. There is an overarching strategy used by the Russians in their military operations now. It's sometimes referred to as the Gerasimov doctrine, but I think that's kind of in disfavor now. But it's the idea of fighting their battles on multiple fronts, and they've openly declared that the cyber front is going to be one of the places where they're going to fight their wars. And so when you see the Ukraine going back now 7-8 years, they've been playing out their battles on these multiple fronts. There's the disinformation campaigns that most people are generally aware of, but there are also these quasi-military cyber attacks. And you add it to the fact that as part of their overarching strategy, they're often impressing into duty full-time cyber criminals to do some of this work. It's not a surprise that the military-grade malware ends up going out there and causing destruction in the private sector. So I just wanted to reorient that. So you were talking about all the damages it was done with. I think the numbers were in the trillions, maybe, for not petty. Is that
For
right?
total damages done, yeah, it was over the top. And
Yeah.
then even fast forward to 2020, and now we're talking SolarWinds. And so, like you said, I worked at Attack, I worked at Intrusion, reverse engineered SolarWinds, and that finding was just such a major capability that Russia had. It's kind of over the top. They had backdoor in all these networks all over the globe, including Ukraine, and they lost that going into this conflict, right? So that was a pretty big loss for them. And then at the end of 21, start of 22, there was in controller malware that was shared, which was targeted against Schneider Electric systems, Omron, and to be able to disrupt, install backdoors, and it was sort of more of a not fully productionized toolkit that we were able to analyze and take apart, but we realized now that it was all maybe part of something much bigger. So where I'm going with this is you combine all that into my head, analyzing it at a very deep level, and you're like, wow, if there's a real conflict, what is Russia going to do, right? Like, what is coming when you put all of that together? It's such a serious capability. And, it wasn't as intense as, the lights going out right when they're coming in for like a month or something like that.
So what did we see then? Like in the attack, there were some events, right? I think one of the ones we were chatting about before was Viasat, right?
Yeah, Viasat was hit, and with malware targeted, it was in MIPS because that's what all their stuff is in, and I think it was called Acid Rain was the name given to the malware family, and but it did take down communications there right as the invasion was happening, and there was also collateral damage there where other people lost access at the same time, not just in Ukraine.
Right. But the fear going into it was that we would see not like one or two of these, but like a whole additional tool chest being cracked open, right?
Yes, like over the top, right?
And we didn't see that. So what happened? I mean, we saw Viasat. You mentioned SolarWinds. Do you think the disruption of SolarWinds had an effect?
I think losing SolarWinds was a big loss for Russia, right? I mean, that they were on everybody's network, and now all of a sudden they're not, right? And right going into that conflict, I think if they would have had that in place, maybe we would have saw a lot more destruction. They would have been able to drop all that wiper malware, get it going, and instead what we've seen is more campaigns for misinformation. We've seen denial of service attacks against their government, their banks, things like that. A lot of SMS attacks where we're trying to social engineer people, and defacement of websites, all the donation sites that were set up. And so we've seen mostly focus there versus this Armageddon that we were all expecting.
Yeah. Elvis, years ago, you and I worked on the Yahoo hack, and that was Russia trying to cultivate kind of broad access to 1 billion users across the world, and we saw them leveraging it into other kinds of webmail and other things there. We hopefully burned that down. But what were you thinking going into the Ukraine invasion of what they had cooking?
I was actually thinking the same thing as Sicko, right? So from 2016 all the way, through 2020, we'd seen this broad spectrum, exactly as Sicko had mentioned. He focused more on like the destructive malware attacks. I think for me, a lot of my focus in 2016, besides working with you on the Yahoo case, there was also the hack and leak of the DNC, right? And so that was also of top of mind. And so I do want to emphasize that, as you mentioned with Russian hybrid warfare, that not only is cyber like a means of destruction, it is also a means of propaganda. And so I think that is also a very large component. Not starting in 2016, since Soviet era all the way to present times. That is a very large portion of it. As Sicko had mentioned, like the hacktivists, all of the different messaging that was going on, not only is it to sow confusion and fear, it's also just to keep people distracted, right? So people are distracted from, as Mike mentioned, as you mentioned, Russian government works with cyber criminals all the time. We were able to make that direct connection in the Yahoo breach, right? Where there was Yahoo FSB case officers using hackers for hire to get access into a private company, right? But it continues to this very day, right? Where the cyber criminal underground, the Russian government, and then not for nothing, the Russian cybersecurity, ecosystem is all kind of this hodgepodge that's working pretty closely together, despite what the Russian government and despite what Russian media is trying to tell you.
Yeah, let me chime in a little bit on that, and we'll see where you can chime in as I'm talking about it. So a lot of the mechanical hack that you were talking about, the FSB tried to do there, was done by Alexei Balan. And Alexei Balan was somebody who was very much on the radar of law enforcement otherwise. He had been indicted multiple times and actually arrested in Greece. And then through mysterious and not so mysterious means ends up escaping Greek custody and ends up back in Russia, right? Now, that's a guy who, Zappos, I think there were a couple other indictments.
Zappos,
that he'd been indicted on multiple hacks before. And then he's turning his attention at the direction of the FSB officers as described in the public indictment, so that's stuff you can talk about, to actually accomplish these hacks and aims that sometimes are very clear based upon who they're hacking. But doing it at the direction of these Russian officials. You talked about hybrid warfare. There are multiple goals being worked out there, things across the spectrum from targeting people who, for obvious political reasons, both within countries around Russia and within it, to things that were purely criminal in interest. Like there was a compromise of the search algorithm of Yahoo itself involving online pharmacies to get kind of kickbacks to the Balan people. And I think it was, I think it was testicular, or it was erectile dysfunction drugs,
it was
right?
Viagra ads,
Yeah, it's Viagra ads, right? So you talk about hodgepodge. I mean, even that action, which is a successful one, was all over the place.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, Russians are human beings, right? And even though we like to joke that U.S. federal employees, we don't get paid well, I want to definitely let you know we get paid better than our Russian counterparts, right? So I actually would have to fill out paperwork in triplicate with 7 layers of approval if I were to get like outside employment. But these guys just do it on the side, right? These are FSB case officers not making very good money, having to do Canadian pharma online ads and spamming, right, to make money. So at the end of the day, I know we like to think of Russians as these 800-pound bears that are out there just like wreaking havoc, but they're human beings just like us. And I definitely think why we haven't seen an Armageddon is because at the end of the day, they're human beings and we are human beings. But like what I think the United States has and the Ukrainians have that they don't have is we have a stronger coalition, right? That's actually built on trust and mutual admiration and like a sense of common decency that I would argue that the Russian government and the Russian criminal syndicates and perhaps the Russian cybersecurity infrastructure doesn't quite have.
Yeah, you talked about that coalition. Sicko, what kind of a private-public partnership has been done to kind of prepare the Ukrainians here?
Yeah, I mean, there's been just a lot of sharing like never before. I think the combination of probably SolarWinds and then the oil pipeline attack sort of lit a fire, right? And we saw the executive order, which was a great thing because it was like, we need to establish this, start establishing doctrine and things of that nature for cyber. It was always kind of quiet until then, and then we saw action being taken. And the days of the NSA classifying IP addresses is kind of going away, and they realize that, hey, if we build relationships with cybersecurity companies, we could actually get a lot further. For example, at Palo, we have 1 million firewalls in the fronts of people's networks, literally, right? So just think of you could deploy a signature and protect 1 million networks around the world. That's a great capability for a government agency to have access to protect people. And they really invested heavily in starting offices, and NSA has the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center established, right? And they directly work with cybersecurity vendors, and this is a partnership, right? And we're actually talking and figuring out how to solve problems. And you see it really, the success of that is what's happening in Ukraine. I think, we're able to protect that country so much more because everybody is collaborating together, working to protect. And I mean, we're sharing with other cybersecurity companies, we're sharing with government agencies, we're working with the Ukraine CERT. We're doing all of that as a private company, right? That's pretty cool, and I think that's why we're seeing the outcomes there that are a lot better than what we expected, because that sharing is actually taking place.
Yeah, there's a lot of negativity, I think, in cybersecurity, and so,
Just a bit.
yeah, but I mean, maybe we're celebrating too early, but in the early days, it feels like there's reason to be optimistic about the prospects of these cooperations, right? How powerful it can be.
Yeah, and we certainly thought that their on-the-ground troop capability versus in cyber was probably equivalent. There'd be sort of maybe the first war that had a joint, giant, over-the-top outcome, maybe even impacting the world. Mm-hmm. But it didn't happen, and yeah, I think maybe it's still too premature, because who knows? In this world, you never know when there's another SolarWinds that's going to pop up tomorrow that you didn't know. But I think it's definitely, I think, a surprise to me to see that level of sharing actually being so beneficial, and hopefully it only just continues.
Yeah, and I think you were touching upon this to a certain extent, Elvis. The Russian cyber capabilities are powerful but not unlimited.
Yeah.
And when you disrupt them, SolarWinds, the different successes they have, and you disrupt the actual hackers in multiple ways, at a certain point, they don't have unlimited resources. Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, from the FBI's perspective, we have made a pivot, right? So I would like to think that we're more aggressive in trying to do disruptive operations now. So I think everyone is used to the FBI, we want to run our case, we want to get indictments, get arrests, and then seize, property, funds, whatever, right? But we've kind of flipped that on its head now, where we know that our investigations take a while to run, right? But what can happen quicker are seizures and disruptions. And so I want to, give our colleagues in Pittsburgh and Atlanta some kudos, right? Operation Cyclops Blink, right? So specifically sandworm-related, GRU, Unit 74455, had this botnet out, right? It was exploiting a vulnerability in a couple of different American appliances, right? And so worked with CISA, we were able to get a cybersecurity advisory out to people, but that wasn't enough, right? There were still compromised systems out there. And so this was the first time, and I was super excited, but we were able to get a seizure warrant signed off by a magistrate judge, where all of these compromised tools that were here in the United States, we developed a tool that could turn it off and then provide notification to that victim, right? So in essence, we were able to take a Russian botnet and cut them off at the knees so that they could not use it to push out the next black energy malware, any other types of malware that they're using. So that's a big difference that we are doing now, is that we're trying to disrupt when it actually will make an impact, as opposed to waiting until we've tied it all up in a bow for our U.S. Attorney's Office to do a charge.
Yeah, I'm not there to slow you down anymore, right? But you were talking about GRU. I mean, GRUs, that's military intelligence, right? So it's actual military intelligence capability you identified and then disrupt it.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember when we would work cases, we'd identify infrastructure that they were using at different points, and then there'd be, what can we do? And that next step wasn't part of the vocabulary then. But you mentioned a pivot. I mean, that's a real change, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the FBI, are you now defining successes in a different way in light of that?
Yeah, we are. And you were a DOJ attorney, right? Indictments, arrests, that's kind of convictions. That's kind of how we used to be. But now it's disruptions, neutralizations. What are we doing to inflict consequences, to inflict pain on cyber adversaries now? So And it's not just in, like this context of Russia. It's the, like the North Koreans. It's all of these other state actors. We're seizing cryptocurrency. We're seizing information infrastructure. We're just trying to wreak havoc wherever we can. And, most recently, kudos to all 56 of our field offices, but FBI Milwaukee was running the front on Genesis Marketplace, right? Did a massive seizure, big takedowns, and then multiple arrests all around the world working with international partners. As I mentioned, that's the one thing that the FBI can do that almost no other law enforcement agency in this nation can do, right? We have over 72 legal attaches. These are FBI agents scattered across the globe in U.S. embassies around the world, working with the FBI's direct counterpart. I think that's kind of the fun part that I get to work, and that we get to work with private sector on, is just how can we bring the pain, right? From Palo Alto Networks point of view, from a Microsoft point of view, but from a U.S. government point of view, specifically the law enforcement angle that the FBI works.
Yeah, and some of those are relationships those attaches built up, but there are also some new tools like the Cloud Act and things like
Yes.
that. Are you able to deploy them as part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are technical operations that we cannot divulge, in an open setting like that. But I want to say, all of the stuff that you watch in movies, I would argue that what we do behind closed doors is actually cooler than a lot of that stuff that we can't talk to you about. But just whatever you can imagine, watching whatever cyber movie you're watching, and I know Mr. Hemsworth was in a really bad one semi-recently. Was it a couple of years ago? But we have those capabilities, but we do have to jump through hoops before we can bring them to bear.
Are you saying he was playing you?
I don't want. I'd rather have Daniel Day Kim play me than
It's like
Chris Hemsworth.
Swordfish with the worm. It's
Yeah.
an actual worm on the screen.
Like the old Worm video game, right? So Sicko, with an eye towards kind of disruption and proactive things, from your perspective, are you able to see more of that and cooperate in it, or?
Yeah, I think, and it's not just, I think, government and public-private collaboration, but we've seen hacktivists to an extreme amount come to the aid of Ukraine. Yeah. I think we're tracking 40 different groups that have come to the aid or go on the side of Russia and have been major players in that conflict as well. We even saw the Conti ransomware gang publicly announce that we are siding with Russia, and anybody who goes against them will be enemies, and we will unleash our full ransomware capability against anybody who takes that side. And then we saw them completely splinter over that decision. And we actually, we handle about 365 ransomware cases a year. And we saw a major dip in that just when Conti went down as a group because they're all the infighting.
Well, their focus is on other things. It's no longer on the ransomware, right? And then that division of focus ends up corresponding with a decrease in their activity.
Yeah, and and the members started leaking their own tools online, and then makes it a lot easier to make defenses against them. All their infrastructure got burned down because they were putting it out there. And so it's kind of nice when hacking groups infight. It saves us a lot of time, pain.
Yeah, there's a legal saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant, but they kind of opened up the windows themselves, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So with that in mind, what do you see coming up next as you're looking at it in the conflict and otherwise? We're in the middle of it now. We can't say definitively as a historical fact what's going to happen and what has happened. But what do you see developing right now?
Well, attacks like SolarWinds take a really long time to build out, right? I think they hacked SolarWinds and sat there for about 6 months before they deployed the backdoor. So it took them that long to develop that full capability, the backdoor, insert it into the source code in the right way, make sure it would actually work and ship it to customers. So they actually deployed a very small version, just kind of like a versioning for themselves, and made sure that they were actually in the supply chain getting shipped to customers when they were hacking SolarWinds. But then they had to develop it all, and they took a lot of time to make sure it would blend in, what kind of infrastructure they would spin up to make it go. And then they were getting ready to, hey, we can't stay on this back door. We got to pivot off of it really quickly. And that's why we saw in the SolarWinds attacks, they immediately pivoted to commercially available malware like Cobalt Strike. And so they instead of using that fancy back door in the supply chain and get caught, they pivoted away, and it was just another Cobalt Strike in your network, which you might have a red team in there right now using it, or it might just show up on your network periodically. People don't think anything of it. And so it's likely there's we just saw 3CX happen. There's a lot of supply chain attacks out there, I think, that have come out since SolarWinds. And I think there's probably, in my experience, where there's something big like that, there's probably another.
There's something going on.
Right, something going on. But it's going to take Russia time, right, to build up a capability like that again. And so that is one area. Otherwise, we see them really focused on misinformation, social engineering, all these kinds of things they're doing in there. But my guess is something like that's around the corner.
Something else I'll raise, I know both of you have a limited ability to respond to this. So I'm going to raise it and let it sit, which is, we can kind of see from the Discord leaks that there's kind of a fairly intensive compromise of Russian military and intelligence operations. And so, because they're in the middle of the invasion, it's going to be difficult for them to clean that out without losing some of their communications capabilities. I'm trying to be a little bit oblique here, but broadly, it's going to slow them down even more, is what I'm saying, because they can't necessarily count on their ability to deploy things secretively in light of what they're seeing there. They may be scrambling right now to look at that. So without teeing that up for a question from you, Elvis, on that disinformation front, what are you and the FBI now looking at?
So, the Russians have never stopped, right? And so I think what we can say is that propaganda, Soviet-style propaganda continues to this very day. And I think one of the things that I'm particularly tracking on is Yevgeny Prigozhin, right? The Russian oligarch who's already been indicted and sanctioned, right? He continues to run the Internet Research Agency, right? And not for nothing, but there's all of these satellite offices that are just popping up everywhere. And so maybe not all of this Russian disinformation or malign influence is being targeted at the United States, but it's just poisoning the entire news media ecosystem in general, right? Trying to sow doubt, trying to sow discontent. And so I think that's what I'm particularly worried about. Heading into 2024, it's already been contentious, and we don't even have all of the declared candidates yet for the primaries, right? But that's one area where I'm really focused on. And then just to throw another wrench into this whole mix of things, not for nothing, but artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, all of the other stuff, the AI piece of it, I'm just waiting for the Russians to figure out how to use it to turbocharge everything else they're doing.
Yeah, on the disinformation front, one of the things you and I worked on was Alice Donovan, who was the fake reporter.
Yes.
Who was out there publishing on multiple fronts. That's something not dissimilar to what you're describing, Sicko. They had to spend a lot of time kind of developing her out, getting published in multiple areas, et cetera. Has that mode of operation gone away, or are there still Alice Donovans out there?
No, there's still Alice Donovans out there. And specifically around 2020, we saw the Russians use deepfakes, right? So they develop profiles for journalists. They use Upwork and other platforms to try to actually get real freelance journalists. But I thought there would actually be more deepfakes and more artificial intelligence used in 2020, but it wasn't as much. But that was definitely one example. Two specific websites that the Russians made. One was called Peace Data, and then the other was called the Newsroom for European and American based speakers, right? So NAEBC or Center. So those were two Russian-made fronts that were purported to be actual news sites, but if you can just imagine a ChatGPT or any kind of AGI being used to supercharge that type of disinformation, it's just going to make it hard for people to be able to discern truth from fiction, even worse.
So we made it more than halfway without saying AI, so that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, that has to be said eventually. So what's keeping you up the most on that? The ability to put out the disinformation in volume, or just the ability to, the inherent distrust in everything?
It's kind of all of it.
Yeah.
And then I've already called my shot. I've been talking with colleagues and folks in private sector. I was like, the next time you see like a video of politician X stumble or politician Y say something crazy, I think everyone's gonna say, oh, this is fake until proven otherwise. Like, that's kind of how I'm gonna approach this. I hate to say that. I'd like to think with reputable, news outlets that we can trust everything that's coming out, but with all of this stuff, and it's like looking better and better every day, I wanna say, not trust, but verify.
Yeah.
And I think with ChatGPT coming out, I think the attacks are going to be very focused on things like social engineering attacks. I think their ability to converse with you, make you think you're someone you're not, or they're someone you're not, is only going to go up. And we're going to see like phishing attacks get like really strong, really fast. I've been investing a lot in like trying to conduct attacks using that, try to build malware, was able to get ChatGPT to create malware and stuff like that. I don't think on the malware front it's going to be as impactful in the near term, because what it's been trained on is more focused on the things that are already out there. And we're seeing such a massive amount of malware reuse going on already, where people are getting access to code really efficiently. There's open source code, there's commercially available code, and then they're even taking each other's tools and repurposing them very quickly. But I think the time where ChatGPT creates a zero-day exploit and finds a vulnerability with the snap of the fingers and just keeps going around doomsday AI kind of stuff, I think we're a ways off of that. But most of the attacks we're seeing right now are social engineering attacks, right? Like, we're seeing a flood of, we said, everybody roll out MFA, you'll be fine. Everybody rolled out MFA, and guess what? Now we're seeing a tremendous amount of social engineering for those tokens. SMS smishing, phishing attacks, MFA fatigue attacks. All of these types of things are social engineering, and ChatGPT plays perfect in social engineering capability. So I think that's right out of the gate where you see it, and I think that's going to have a big impact in upcoming elections and stuff.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how, I guess you would train it up. You train it up to talk like the person whose email you've compromised, and just insert yourself in and man in the middle and automate it, and then you can operate at scale, right?
Yeah. Outside of ransomware attacks, the biggest attack is business email compromise. And that's where you trick somebody, you get into their email accounts, you pretend that you're the CFO and you need an invoice paid, the invoice is fake, and you run away with $1 million. That's probably the most popular attack, even more than ransomware. Yeah. And it's all about social engineering. How much do you know about that CFO or CEO or whoever needs to sign off on the payment? And that's exactly what ChatGPT is amazing at, knowing everything about the person, scraping all of this data, and then being able to talk to them like they are that person.
Well, one of the low-tech fixes for those BEC attacks is the confirmatory phone call, right? But you can then now do effectively the deep fake voice, right?
Scary.
So, yeah. Just as we're starting to get people to internalize, make the phone call, then we have to think of the next thing, right?
Well, yeah, and it could read the email and realize how the person talks and then write in a way that doesn't. I mean, a lot of phishing attacks, you read them and you're like, oh, this is obviously a phishing attack and not my boss. But imagine if it's written in their style of language and signing their name in the unique way they do it, or whatever. It's gonna be able to do that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Or keep talking about the boring phishing story.
Yeah, or they go back and forth a few times, and that's enough confirmation, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we dove into AI and out again. So that's the future. What about? We touched upon a little bit the cooperation, public-private cooperation. I think there are some other aspects of that you and I chatted about beforehand, right? Proactive actions taken by private companies and by the FBI to dismantle infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, so I think Sicko's already talked a lot about the private sector part, but I mean, the FBI, right? We're a law enforcement agency, we're a domestic security service, But like everything we do is public, right? It's out there. But I have colleagues at other three-letter agencies, and so just be mindful that there are other technical operations going on that I'm not allowed to talk about, but at least you can see what is in the realm of the possible. I would also foot stomp, like the thing that I think that we in the U.S. government do better than a lot of other types of governments, specifically those are in autocracies, is that like when I say we in the FBI are partnering with our counterparts at the security service, the SBU for Ukraine, not for nothing, but guess what? We also have Department of Treasury, we have Department of State. It's like a whole of government, full court press supporting the Ukrainians working against Russian interests, right? And that's a big part of it. And then not only is it the United States, we have NATO too, right? And so although Ukraine is not a NATO ally right now, guess what? We just picked up one in Finland and hopefully Sweden coming shortly, right? But so we have all of those allies as well. And so I think what you can see is Russia has tried to counter that by like doing a drone deal with the Iranians, right? And maybe getting non-lethal support or buying stuff from China. But there are not as many willing on that side of the coalition as on our side of the coalition. I think that makes a really big difference, right? Because think of all of the grants, think of my colleagues from CISA, DHS, state, providing both support, training, and resources, along with the private sector, to improve the Ukrainian cyber resiliency. And I think the one thing that we haven't talked about is, I'm not going to lie, like when Russian tanks were rolling across the borders, I thought things were going to be over quickly, right? But I want to really say, we haven't really talked about it, but the Ukrainian resiliency, in light of all of that has happened to them and continues to be this real, bastion of democracy and hope, out there in Eastern Europe. I think that warms my heart.
Yeah. I mean, I think you touched upon it, but the FBI is partnering directly with Ukrainian law enforcement, right?
Yeah,
Multiple fronts?
absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, and our mutual colleague, Alex,
yes.
right? Like he was the cyber assistant legal attaché in Kyiv until they had to evacuate him out to our embassy in Warsaw, right? And so I hate to say it now, but like our assistant legal attaché for Kyiv is in Warsaw right now, but still on a daily basis talking with domestic security services, talking with military legal attachés. So being able to share intelligence, on like a practitioner level on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And we're sharing directly with
With
Ukraine's
CERT,
with their CERT.
Yeah.
Like they did the same kind of thing, reaching out to all these different companies that would have technology deployed all over the country.
Yeah.
So it's easy for them to get the things they need deployed with a snap of the fingers. Just talk to us.
Yeah. And that's multiple fronts we're talking about there. Alex had to run out of the country with his family, just like so many Ukrainians had to do, right? But he's also a dedicated FBI agent and native Russian speaker who's out there hustling against the bad guys, right?
And then just a plug for him, he's going to be talking tomorrow too on another panel. So if you guys want to hear, Ukrainian cyber assistant director, and then with one of our agents, and then our assistant director, I think is going to be moderating that panel. So I plug that for tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then our executive assistant director at our booth is also going to be talking with the cyber assistant director for Ukraine. So please come to our booth, look at the schedule, and then we would love to have all of you come out.
Should we embarrass him? I think he's here now. No, let's not embarrass him. No, okay, all right. I threatened, but I didn't make him stand up.
No.
Yeah. All right. So that cooperation with CERT, what shape does that take?
Well, it's just kind of continuous communication.
Yeah.
So we've established a lot of chat rooms and things of that nature where we're able to share very quickly. And there's a lot of different entities in there where they could say, hey, we're seeing this. Are you seeing it? Hey, this is a signature that's going to protect. Can you deploy it? And of course, we vet it and figure out where we're seeing it and if it makes sense to do so. And then we were able to deploy all sorts of technology in country right as that was happening. We've even done an incident response in Ukraine during the conflict. So we've been heavily there, and so it's very active. And it's like, oh, well, you think we're now over a year into the invasion, right? Like we're well into it. You think it'd kind of slow down and yes, there was the upfront intensity of it, and not knowing what would come, but it's still been a continuous activity, and we have to have. It's nice that I have the ability to have employees who are like dedicated and focused on that and continually like providing benefit. So it's really cool.
And the conversation goes both ways, right? Like obviously, we hope it helps the Ukraine, but it helps your goals too to be able to see what's going out there in the wild.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you could protect them, you could protect customers all around the world, right? And so it's just a huge benefit. And like we saw with all these different attacks, SolarWinds, NotPetya, you name it, everybody got hit with those things, not just Ukraine. So we're worried about that kind of thing happening as well. So if we see a wiper deployed in Ukraine and it's hitting their banks, we could then have signatures for that, make sure we're protecting all over the place, because who knows where it's going to show up next.
Inoculate the world.
Yeah. No, so it's this mutual beneficial thing, right, between the agencies and the private sector. It's really cool.
And that conversation wasn't happening in 2016.
Not as much.
Yeah, I mean, not as much as I would have liked, for sure. I mean, I think that is the difference, right? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, private sector, your job is to make money. But I have seen companies such as yours, like really, you have dedicated, assets, resources to, helping forward defend Ukraine. Obviously, you have some self-interest as well, but like, I want to say it goes beyond self-interest with all of these American companies that we've mentioned, right? So I think that really warms my heart too, is that, like, I think a lot of people think the FBI, we're big brother, we know everything. No, that's not true at all. At the end of the day, we are human beings, right? But I think, when you have public sector and then private sector working together, then you can get more of a whole threat picture, right? And that's really something like, me, I'm here in the local field office, FBI San Francisco. I would like to think that like either me or personnel in our office have worked with many of the organizations sitting in this very room, right? And so at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that we do not want hackers on our systems. We do not want hackers using our products, our services, our platforms. And so that is the common interest that we all share, right?
Good versus evil.
Yeah, exactly.
And although the North Star for the private sector is making money, there's more altruism there than you might think sometimes. I've worked with a number of these organizations, and you mentioned good versus evil. You guys like whacking the bad guys on a fundamental level, whether it makes you any money or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to work for a company that isn't actively trying to do that, because that's the goal, right? That's the fun of it.
Yeah. And all these jobs are hard, and everybody needs we're going to be working late. And you need a reason why you're doing that on those late nights.
And I would say the cybersecurity companies themselves are starting to share more than ever as well. Like, we're part of the Cyber Threat Alliance. There's like 35 member companies. We're all sharing. We're giving each other early access to our blogs, so we know what's coming, so that protections can be deployed. I remember with SolarWinds, we actually told all of the cybersecurity companies, as we were telling the government, and before that SolarWinds, but so that they could have all the detections deployed, right? Like when the red team tools went out the door, we worked with all those companies to get protections in place. And so that also wasn't a thing 10 years ago in the industry of like sharing at that level cross company, because it was like, well, it's my intelligence, not your intelligence. But even that, we're starting to tear down those walls. We still have a ways to go, where you snap your fingers and every technology is protecting in the same way, but we're getting warmer.
All right. With an idea that that's an ongoing process, what do you see as like a next step with an eye towards Ukraine? What would you like private sector to do more of, if you could?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's just I think it's going so well. I don't know that there's something in my mind that's like, I wish this could happen to do better. I think we just need more of it. We need to keep those silos between public, private, and the companies themselves. Just keep tearing down silos.
Keep working on that conversation.
Yeah, I'm very pro sharing and talking, and that's why we're seeing that outcome.
Yeah. How about Elvis, from your perspective?
So I definitely want us to be imposing more consequences on these actors, right? And the thing is, right, like we have a finite amount of personnel as well, but like what is expected from the Attorney General and from the FBI director is that we can rack and stack these types of technical operations, these disruption operations. I want to be able to do these at a higher cadence. And so I think the way we do that is like, I think, we have DOJ on board and, like the legal piece of it has been figured out, but working with private sector, right? Like we had to work with WatchGuard on the Cyclops Blink situation, obviously working with FireEye Mandiant, SolarWinds on the SolarWinds situation, and Hafnium working with Microsoft on that. But like really, you can see all of these big disruptions and takedowns, really big private sector, public sector partnership, right? So just an increased cadence of that to try to, to just tamp down any cyber aspirations that the Russian government has.
Do you want to open it up?
Yeah, I saw that one.
It's five.
Yeah. All right, so we're at 5 minutes left in the time of the session. It's not a lot of time, but I think we have one or more microphones set up.
Yeah,
If
they're set
anybody
up
had any
around.
questions. It looks like we got somebody coming up, unless the bathroom's this way.
Yeah. I'm Alice Donovan. And no.
I knew it.
I got that.
Yeah, you got that. Question on, have Russian sanctions imposed a reduction in velocity of attacks or been somehow effective in stopping network attacks?
Unfortunately, no. So, in my experience, it seems like the velocity, or at least the quantity, has increased, right? So, to me, if you'd asked me, how much more spear phishing, I would say 200%. But a Google tag report just came out. They said 300% increase in at least spear phishing, right? So, I would say the quantity has increased, and I would like to think it's because there's some level of desperation from the Russian Federation.
The sanctions also, from a legal perspective, it takes a while for those risks to be internalized by businesses.
Yeah.
While it has immediate effects on some people, the broader effects preventing the velocity are when, I don't know, there's a merger of one company with another, and all of a sudden they have a sanctions problem and they can't get access to capital. Those are things that don't happen immediately, but happen over time. So it doesn't mean it's not having any effect. Some of them are immediate, but the broader spillover effects are going to take some time for the companies to internalize. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Hey, this is a question for any of you. With cyber attacks being included in warfare, do you ever see a cyber attack being an official act of war?
Well, I mean, there are kind of multiple ways to look at that, right?
It should be.
Yeah.
It absolutely should be.
Yeah, so broadly, yes, right? That's the short answer. You get into the weeds when it comes to things like act of war is a specific contractual thing, right? And so, was an act of war the reason why a thing happened? That got litigated in NotPetya, right? Yeah. Because there were insurance contracts for the shutdown. Was it Mars, the shipping company?
Maersk.
Maersk, where they said, you insurance company have to pay out for our interruption, billions of dollars. And the insurance company said, no, act of God or act of war. And so I don't think that litigation has completed yet, even though we're years later, because we're talking about billions of dollars. But yeah, so that contractual thing, in the long run, there's going to be people prosecuted for acts of war on the cyber front.
But we need that established, because if you blow up an oil pipeline and it's down for 3 months, no casualties, there would have been a totally different reaction than ransomware attacking it. But is there really a difference, right? And right now there is a big difference in the way we react, so.
Yeah. So we're still internalizing that change, but yeah, short answer is yes. Yeah, yes.
So Sicko mentioned earlier that there were 40 plus hacktivists that were supporting the Russia government in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. I'm curious, what are some maybe best practices that businesses can put forward to kind of prevent those hacktivists from breaking through?
Well, a lot of them are just pivoting from their normal day jobs, right? Doing ransomware, business email compromise, all those things we talked about. So it's going to be the same layered defense that you're going to want to implement to protect against those things. So it's not like, hey, there's some unique thing you need to go off against them. It's just kind of like they're pivoting their operations from what they were normally doing and then picking a side. And some, people that are robbing people of money did go on the side of Ukraine, which is kind of interesting, right? Because it's like in a lot of these countries, they operate this as a business, right? Somebody hacks in, they sell their access, they come in, they deploy their ransomware, and then we negotiate with them. And they're typically staying away from hospitals and schools and stuff like that, although Vice Society has thrown that out the window. But in general, most of them have some sort of ethics, and we saw it come to play here, where they're criminals, but they're aiding Ukraine. So it's just interesting.
It's useful also to keep in mind that it's not all black and white when it comes to these people, right? Like,
Everything
it's
is
obviously
gray,
shades of
yeah.
gray. There were a number of Ukrainian-based hackers who I prosecuted when I was in the Department of Justice, when the Newswire services were hacked. That was a Ukrainian operation.
Yep.
And they used that information, were insider trading on from the outside because they had access to all earnings and other reports before they were made public. They're somewhere on the continuum, but 40 of them decided to not be on the Russian side, no matter what else they're doing on their day jobs. All right. With that said, I think we're close to the end, right?
Right,
All right.
We're done.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.